What is up, patrons? I am back with a Patreon exclusive video. It is a level up video. We're going to be going over a topic that I tend to talk about a lot. You've heard me reference it in the Coronacast we've been doing. You hear me reference it basically every set, every format that comes out, and that is rules of engagement. And so I'm going to be going into number one, what that is, number two, things that affect it, and then of course, what it looks like right now. And I think this is a really big topic for those that are really into the theory of when a set's released, how people are going to react, and then of course how the format shapes up. And then this is going to help you take and gain your own bearings and figure out how to approach a unsolved format or a format that is solved within the first couple of weeks, but then you can help kind of determine the way the format's going to move or the way it's going to look, going forward. So we're going to go right into the video. First thing is, what does rules of engagement mean? So when I say rules of engagement, what I'm basically saying is how you have to approach deck building when it comes to competitive viability, and then also lines of play and the way that you have to approach every single game. And this is one thing to remember, is that when you're talking about rules of engagement, establishing those, you are really trying to look at the most hyper competitive versions of certain strategies and archetypes within a given format. And so usually your rules of engagement can be set by a few things. It can be set by, new things that come out. It could be set by leaders. It could be set by new mechanics in general. And so the rules of engagement, let's say we take a look at right now with Vegex, is right now you have a deck that exists in the format where the leader draws X cards per turn. X equals the number of cards milled that trigger the ability. And then all those pluses, the amount that I can do within 1 to 2 to 3 turns, is something that immediately creates instant tension and pressure on the rest of the format. When we take a look back at the previous format with Surge Goku before the errata, Surge Goku was such a dominant leader and created a kind of unique rules of engagement because it basically defined itself as the definitive mid-range deck. So it made sure that you could only do two things. You either had to go really low to the ground and get underneath it before it could establish itself, or you had to go over the top of it and win the late game. And so having Surge of Divinity basically established that truth, that rule of engagement, which was you had to pick one of the two sides. And if you were going to play in the middle, you had to play the same exact thing, or you were going to find yourself in a world of trouble. Broly the Awakened Threat, when it existed, if we're talking about Broly Height of Mastery set a rule of engagement where you have to get them dead within the first 4 turns. If you don't, you're going to end up losing a victory strike. So when they were on the play, you had to approach the game much differently than when you were on the play. And so Broly kind of set that in motion. And then also think about, the blue-yellow Broly deck with Zeno Button. It was the leader that could best take advantage of the broken yellow cards and Zeno Button. So you had to be able to play strategies that basically didn't have to interact with Broly, or didn't rely on attacking Broly to be able to generate advantage, which is why Shenron was a very popular choice in that metagame. The same thing with Kid Ku, because Kid Ku didn't really care. If you got a 20k on the board, it could defend itself, and then also it had access to 30k to be able to pressure the leaders to make sure that they couldn't combo out, because Broly's hand size was never really that huge. And then, of course, Shenron created rules of engagement where you were also put on a clock. You had to play the game either really low to the ground, or you had to do something better than them, faster than them, which is why objection was so important. Same thing with like Janemba existing. Janemba was so powerful against Shenron because it was a virtual clock. Being able to mill them and create this tension where they're either going to kill you in 1 turn, or they're not going to have enough time and they're going to end up being milled out. But Shenron created rules of engagement where you had to approach the matchup in multiple ways. Hirudegarn did the same thing. Hirudegarn made every deck have to be hyper defensive, because it was the Storm archetype. So every deck either had to be hyper defensive, or you were someone trying to capitalize on all the hyper defensive decks by going over the top. And so those are the rules of engagement that were created. And so now, I'll be going over the current rules of engagement and how I believe right now, but let me first dive into what can affect it. So a few things, right? A lot of times you can take a look at some of what the best cards are in the game, and that kind of helps mold and give you your view of how games can be approached and how formats can be approached. And a lot of it has to do with, let's take a look at something simple as your counters. So what are the best counters? Topo Regis, Dormant Potential Unleashed. These are the best counters in these specific colors, so you have tension there. You talk about like when Grade 8 Bardock Raiders Orkai got released. When it was released, it was the best battle card in the game because it's a combo into play for 2 energy. It's a 20k double striker, draws a card, top something. So when that got released into the game, that's one of your power points. That helps create the rules of engagement where if you're not yellow, how are you dealing with this card? Arrival did the same thing. Arrival made it so playing the game and swinging at your opponent's leader, or creating a combo step, was pretty negative unless you were also taking advantage of the combo step. So the existence of Arrival and how popular Arrival was generated a rule set for the format where you had to approach the game much differently. You had to limit the number of combo steps your opponent could take, and you had to have ways to deal with the board that they create without actually having to play cards of their turn. Unisons now do the same thing. They create a new rule where when they're in play, they can't be ignored, because they have some sort of ability that's going to gain incremental advantage over the course of the game. Whether it's giving you access to free cards, whether it's giving you access to an additional attacker, or a threatening ultimate that forces attention to be paid to it, Unisons have shaped the landscape of the game. Same thing with the free counterplays. Now, before you make any sort of commitment on your turn, you have to worry about a free counterplay. So you have to address the problem before you even get to that point of playing your card. So the game changes just by the existence of a Unison being in play. Obuni Afterimage Slash, it's a threat with deflect. A threat having deflect is incredibly important right now just due to the existence of everything we talked about with free counterplays. So now it's one of those things where Obuni's a turn 4 play, it has deflect, and this now becomes the best battle card in blue because of this fact. Saiyan Instincts changes the way games work, because if you're playing 4 copies of Saiyan Instincts in your deck that wants to play a mid-range late-game strategy because you want to use your energy to pay for drawing cards. And so Saiyan Instincts created that urgency to get the opponent dead before they have the ability to take advantage of it. Because when someone uses 1 to 2 Saiyan Instincts throughout the course of the game and they have time to do that, they're going to find themselves ahead. First to Strike SS Son Goku from Series 10, you have a leader that has a built-in board wipe. This changes how you have to approach the format from a deck building perspective and how you're going to commit on your turn when it comes to playing battle cards versus playing Unisons. Dormant Potential Unleashed, like I said, mixed with Topo, same sort of thing. You have that counter that then dictates what the rest of the format has to do. So your pillars of the format, your power cards of the format, are shift into different colors, and you're getting different things. You're getting paid for choosing one archetype of another. And then Sensu Bean. Sensu Bean's been around forever, and so one of the important things about determining rules of engagement in a format is figuring out how good Sensu Bean actually is. Which, in my opinion, right now, I know it's blasphemy, I don't think Sensu Bean's very good right now. I think it's good if you can awaken early. I think it's good with the Vegito leader, but outside of the Vegito leader that awakens early, I just don't think Sensu Bean's very good. I know, shocker. So, let's go into how often does rules of engagement change. So I love using this example, the PPG events that came up. The rules of engagement of format change relatively fast. Take the first weekly tournament. You had Son Gohan, Reboot Gohan win. The week after, or the same weekend, you had Andrew Duvall win with Surge Coup, mid-range deck that can beat aggressive strategies. The week after that, Andrew Duvall repeated, and then following that, you had Boo win because Boo was going under because he was playing the Universe 3 strategy. Then, go the week after, Surge Coup comes back and takes advantage of the fact that everyone was playing a over-the-top strategy the week before to beat Surge Coup, and then those decks ended up losing to Boo. So then Surge Coup comes back, gets the W because it's able to take advantage of all the aggressive decks. Then you make a shift. You expect people to either go over the top or go under, and then at the Players' Championship, you focus on playing a strategy that beats the deck from the week before, which was Surge Coup. So you have Hatchak and you have Piccolo. So the format changed over the span of time because it's, say, week 1, like I said, Reboot Gohan. Week 2, you had Surge Coup. Week 3, everyone was trying to beat Surge Coup, and the way to beat Surge Coup at the time was going over the top. So then the person playing Boo, Universe 3, was able to take advantage of the field. And so they, by winning the tournament with Boo, changed the rules of engagement to where now Surge Coup becomes top dog again. So Surge Coup wins. And then now you look at the Players' Championship and it's like, okay, well, I think people are either going to be playing hyper-aggressive strategies or they're playing Surge Coup. So what is, can meet the best of both worlds, where Hatchiak can defend itself against hyper-aggressive strategies and has a game against Surge Coup, and then Piccolo has a really good matchup against Surge Coup just because of that whole going late, not attacking aspect. So the rules of engagement can change fairly quickly, depending on how your format looks. Whether if you have a for sure best deck, or if you just have a bunch of decks that are very close together. The tournaments can change on a week-to-week basis, and the cards that become valuable also change. So let's take a look at now. So what is the current rules of engagement? So the first thing I like to do is you can make a list of all the PowerPoints in the format. You can make a list of all the things that we know to be true. And the thing we know to be true right now is Vegex is currently the best deck in the format. So when you have that truth, you have that fact, and again, it is still my opinions, but I believe it is a fact that it is the best deck in the format. You now have to operate under a few different axes, right? Going under it or trying to play the same game, right? Next to it, you have to put Reboot Gohan, because Reboot Gohan is going to be playing in that similar space, that first couple of turns space to try and win the game in the same amount of time. So you have to put them close together when it comes to your rules of engagement and how you're approaching attacking the format, right? And then next to those, you have to then go into the leaders that directly hate against those. So Hatchak and Topo, Candidate of Destruction. So the ones that hate exactly against it, against Vegex, against Reboot Gohan, etc. Then you have to take a look from Hatchak to Topo and then realize that Invoker is now on the other end of the spectrum. So you have Vegex on one side and Reboot Gohan on one side. Then you have Invoker all the way on the far side. And so there's this weird middle ground where this is Hatchak and Topo are going to try and live in that middle ground to be able to take advantage of the hyper-aggressive strategies, the go-wide strategies, but they're going to succumb to Invoker. And then now you have to take a look even further, and then the deck that exists in a very similar space as Invoker. I know it sounds weird, but Ferocious Strike as Son Goku, having the ability to have that built-in board wipe every turn, is going to operate in that same space as Invoker, where it's going to check a lot of matchups due to the fact that it has this built-in ability, this innate ability to control the board and then be able to win the game through attrition. I know it can't win the game through direct damage like Invoker can, but it operates in a similar axis where it's playing a very non-interactive strategy and trying to win the game by not interacting and just doing things that you are unable to do. And they're going to do them better than you. So you're going to have your board cleared. You're not going to be able to generate a ton of pressure in the mid to late game. They're constantly going to have the edge when it comes to, not necessarily card advantage, but virtual advantage due to the cards they have access to in their drop area. So these decks operate in a very similar space, but they're both, one checks the other. Ferocious Strike checks Invoker really hard, just because the existence of killing everything with barrier, but they're both operate in that space where if you're trying to play a fair deck, a fair strategy, like Yellow Gotenks, or, any sort of red deck or any green deck that's not Ferocious Strike Son Goku, you immediately already have an issue playing against these two decks. Same thing if you're trying to play Jiren Leader. If you're playing blue, but you're not playing these types of strategies, you're already just automatically inherently weak to these decks. So you're in this weird space where you have one side of the metagame, you have Vegex and Reboot Gohan that are trying to operate in the same avenues if you're playing hyper-aggressive strategies. Then you have Hatchak and Topo, which are looking to only thrive off the fact that Gohan and Vegex exist. And then if you're trying to be in the middle somewhere, you're trying to play Gotenks, you're trying to play Jiren, you have to worry about the fact that you have two decks that sit on the polar opposite side, Invoker and Ferocious Strike S's Son Goku, and you have to be able to beat those decks somehow. And so looking at just the way that the rules of engagement is for leaders and rules of engagement is just looking at the leader portion of the format, is operating in that middle space feels very difficult. And it's really hard for me to not want to register Vegex, a green leader, or a yellow leader, whether if it's Topo, Gotenks, etc., because Invoker, I feel like, has such a polarizingly bad matchup against the hyper-aggressive strategies. So it's such a weird format that we're in right now, going into week 1, or 2, 3, etc., because everything is so polarized. Your matchups are so polarized. So finding that deck that can go almost 50-50 with everything feels like a really good place to be right now. We don't have access to Surge Coup. I feel like the green Goku, Ferocious Strike S Son Goku, is probably the closest to that kind of 50-50 feel. But then we have to start looking at the power points in the format when it comes to cards. So looking at negates, if you have to rank negates from 1 to last, or in general, Dormant Potential Unleashed, Topo Righteous Aid, you have Protector of the People and Flying Nimbus, which I think Flying Nimbus and Protector of the People, very similar. I think Protector of the People gets the edge because of the fact that the way that works, you discard and you don't succumb to the issue of unisons, which Flying Nimbus you're susceptible to. But Topo and Dormant Potential Unleashed are the top, right? So if you want to play a deck that's going to be able to have game against these hyper-aggressive strategies, you are going to want to play green or red cards, unless you're playing a very polarizing leader like Hatchak or Topo that are reliant on their leaders doing the work for you defensively. Then you take a look at unisons, and Vegeta Unison of Fury is going to be the best unison when it comes to stopping a lot of these early aggressive strategies that rely on battle cards. And then when you start going down the list, Bardock Paternal Unison is going to be the best unison with Ferocious Strike as his son Goku, and it disrupts the combo step, so then comboing cards get worse. Zeno then is a blue unison, and then Gotenks the red unison. The unison power levels are so interesting because the yellow and the green ones are so much better than the blue and the red ones. I know that I'm biased. I think, like, because of just all my testing, I think Sin Shenron Unison is the best red unison, but the fact that it costs 3 in this format, in this world, feels really awkward. So yellow and green have the best unisons, blue and red are behind by a lot, and then of course black, I don't really count, because Gotenks Unison, you're pairing it with Vegeks. It's incredibly powerful when you pair it together. But so this makes the counterplay argument weird too, right? Because the blue counterplay, God's Healing Technique, is probably the best one because the card never hits the board. Frieza is the second best because it kills something. Vegeta is the third, and then Yamcha is dead last. Because Yamcha, yeah, it's good. You can choose up to your opponent's battle cards and make them 15, but it's not doing the work that the other ones are. So you have this tension here between which cards are going to be the best versus plus what unison you're using. And then now take into account that unison, since they're going to be so important, whatever your strategy you're playing, that aside from free counterplays and worrying about that, every deck has to account for unisons and free counterplays. So your deck needs some sort of cheap, efficient answer to unisons that doesn't completely subject you to getting wrecked by a counterplay. So this is why your one energy or your free double strike attackers are so important. If you have access to your free double striker or your one energy double striker against a unison, you're going to have an opportunity to get it off the board. If you don't have them in your deck, your likelihood is that you are not going to be able to get a unison off the board unless your opponent mismanages their counters, doesn't defend it well enough. And that's not really going to happen in the most competitive, play that we're going to have. So as you can see, the format's really weird because your super defensive strategies have to be green and red, unless you're playing a leader that like Topo or Hachiak that have the built-in defense. So you're already there. So you have to do this measure. And then when you start looking at the unisons, yellow and green are the best unisons, right? Move to the counterplay. Blue is the best, but its unisons are one of the worst. And so green and yellow become the best counterplays because you also have the best unisons. And then your double strikers. You need to make sure you're stocked up on double strikers. So all of your colors and finding the right color pairing and pulling the right levers here and there. That's why I looked at, when talking about a leader like yellow Gotenks. That's why I went yellow red, is because Sensubin is okay. Like it's a good card, but it's not as good as Topo Righteous Aid in this format right now. So red, yellow felt the best because Topo Righteous Aid is such a powerful card in buying you that extra turn, which is so important because you also need to make sure you're playing a strategy that you're either constantly disrupting the opponent or you're punishing them. It's one or the other. Like you're either constantly disrupting or you're punishing them. Because if you're not doing either of those things, you're not punishing them on the turn where you are able to stop their turn and then hit them on the crackback, and you're not disrupting the entire game plan, then your strategy doesn't work. Your deck is not competitively viable. You can't just be a deck that sits in the middle and doesn't do any of those things. So that is how you have to approach the format going forward right now, is where are your power points? Where are your spikes, the power spikes? What cards end up being the best offensively, defensively? What strategies can punish or disrupt? Or do both? But if you're not playing the game right now, if you're not approaching deck building that way, or you're trying to play something that is reliant on drawing a singular card, or you're trying to play something that is trying to be its own ship passing in the night, but it's not more powerful than what you see, then you're going to have a really bad time early on in this format. And I think that's why the deck building approaches that we take at 3Issue Productions are so different than everybody else's, because we try and establish these rules of engagement so fast. So that's something to take into account. I do think that the red-green cards and the Champ Pack cards that are coming out, the Gohan Champ Pack card is amazing. I think that the red-green burn archetype has a lot of merit. We have a red-green baby list that's trying to win the game within the first 3 to 4 turns. We have that in the pipeline already for content this week. I'm excited to get that out to you guys on the Patreon so you guys can see, what this looks like even further, where we take all that knowledge we have and then we apply it so we can operate in that one spectrum of trying to punish someone for giving us an extra turn. And then this disrupt we've already shown you with Green Goku. So I don't want to say the format solved because I don't think it's solved. I think that the player base has so much power when it comes to the way that formats look coming in week 1 in the following weeks, because people want to play what they want to play, and at the same time they like playing certain strategies they see online. Like people like the Blue Vegito leader, which I think he's a great leader. And so take that into account. Not everything we say is perfect. Not all this is going to be 100% accurate. But I think if you operate in this space or this assumption of your strategy either needs to be punishing or disrupting, I think you're going to find yourself in a much better place. And I think just taking a look at this list of cards, figuring out where your power spikes are in the format, you're going to be in a good spot. Something to take into account too, and I haven't touched on this since I made the Sin Shenron video, the yellow Sin Shenron, is how Sin Shenron takes advantage of this format too. So Sin Shenron also operates in a very similar space to, not in a similar space, but it operates in a space that's going to be just past Ferocious Strike Son Goku, where you play a Sin Shenron, and Sin Shenron inherently has that matchup definitively against Ferocious Strike Son Goku. And same thing goes whenever Sin Shenron's playing against one of the fair decks. If you're playing against Gotenks, or you're playing against Topo, or you're playing against Hatjack. So remember that as this format develops, as it evolves, and you start seeing it change on a week-to-week basis, the cards that are the best become different. As of right now, I think Vegeta Unison of Fury is the best Unison, but that's not to say 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now, when Sin Shenron starts to become the pick, that Meki Kabura doesn't become the best yellow Unison. So I'm really excited to see how this format plays out. I hope you guys are too. I think Series 10 brings a lot to the game. I think metagaming is going to be really cool in the early couple of weeks, and I'm excited to see where we go. I know that the Frieza Healing Pod deck is really popular, but again, it's not operating in all the same axes that these decks are, and I think it's important to remember that I'm looking at the highest level of competitive viability in the first couple of weeks of the format. But anyways, I've rambled long enough. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you learned something. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for subscribing, and be sure I'm going to be doing an announcement for the $10 tier coming up relatively soon. So #ScrubFam is best fam. Okay, thanks. Bye!